I wanted to say a massive thank you to Zixar for doing my profile picture and my channel art. He's really good at what he does. I'll leave his channel link in the description. I also wanted to say a massive thank you to Deburke for doing this collaboration with me. He's got a really good channel and I really recommend you go and subscribe to him.
I used to work in a hospital as a paid intern for my undergraduate medical degree. The hospital I worked in wasn't very big, although it was apparently deemed historical by local people. People told me the hospital used to be a safe house for Southerners fleeing the North during the American Civil War. The building itself was refurnished and upholstered many times, so it wasn't run down or anything. There are even statues of Civil War troops from both the North and South outside the entrance, which only added to the fanciness of the place. I've even been told that the statues seem to glow from the sun's reflection during mid-afternoon. However, I worked nights. They had plenty of help during the day, but nobody really wanted the night shift. Being the desperate poor student that I was, I still decided to take it, even if it meant being nocturnal 4 times a week. My first week at the hospital was nothing to write home about. Patients were all sleeping soundly, and the security guard was friendly when I entered and exited the building. The very few nurses I worked with seemed to be friendly, and I actually liked working with them. At the end of the 3rd week, though, things began to change. Nothing major happened at first, but there was a problem with one of the patients. It was an old man who suffered from mild schizophrenia. Doctors say he shattered his femur bone after he plunged 3 stories down. His family reportedly said he was hallucinating. During the entire duration of his hallucination, he only kept mumbling, "fault, sorry," and "abandoned," and then proceeded to step off the roof. During the middle of the 3rd week, he would always scream violently before I found him awake in cold sweats. When I asked him what was wrong, he would only tell me he's sorry before sobbing viciously. I stayed by his bed and comforted him until he would sleep again. This continued for the entire week until the 4th. I alerted the doctors about the man's symptoms. They accredited the nightmares to his schizophrenic hallucinations. They consulted the old man's psychiatrist, who prescribed more medication for him so he wouldn't wake more people. However, I eventually realized that the meds did not work. He would still wake up crying with rivers of sweat soaking his clothes and bed. By the time the 4th week began, everything in that hospital changed. I would find the old man waking up violently as usual, but he stopped crying. He was so calm and peaceful now that it was almost unnerving. I asked him if he was alright, and he calmly responded by saying, "I'm coming back to save my friends." I asked what, and he replied, saying, "I'm redeeming myself. My company of armed brothers will sleep in peace, knowing I saved them." He shuffled back into his covers and slept. I didn't understand a word that he was saying, but it looked like he was fine. At least he wasn't crying anymore, which strangely comforted me. As I walked out of the room, I gently closed the door behind me before the lights in the entire hospital went dark. The power hadn't went out. The air conditioner was still on because I could hear it. Just the lights. I heard footsteps to my left and I saw that it was a security guard. I asked him what happened. Faulty wiring in one of the main power lines blew out the lights. Luckily, none of the medical equipment was affected. He handed me a flashlight and said to watch where I was walking. I thanked him and began my daily routine. Fortunately, my computer was just fine. I had it plugged in, but didn't know if it would still turn on. I resumed looking over patient files from the day shifts. An hour into my work, I began hearing the noises of furniture being dragged across the floor down the left hallway. I was taken aback, but I assumed it was one of the nurses moving furniture for some reason. I barely turned my head to my computer when the noise began again. It was getting louder. Who would possibly need to move furniture at this time? I stood up from my seat and flashed my light at the hallway. What I saw then would terrify me for the rest of my life. It was one of the statues from the entrance. He was in a different position and his face was twisted with rage and anger. The one thing that caught my attention was the blood from his bayonet. Pools of blood dripping down the soldier's bayonet flowed into the white hospital floors. He was standing with his bayonet outwards, as if he was ready to attack. I was snapped back to reality when I heard a blood-curdling scream from upstairs. I blinked several times and the statue was gone. Not even the blood that dripped on the floor was there anymore. I ran upstairs to see who screamed and found out it was one of the nurses. She was completely mortified. Her face was pale and her eyes were wide open. She was crying and breathing unevenly. She pointed at the room where the old man was. The white curtains were now soaked with red stains. The floor was dripping with blood. On the bed was the mangled body of the schizophrenic man. His stomach was visibly cut wide open to show where his entrails and organs should have been. However, the only thing left of his insides were his bones. Everything else was somehow gone. I wanted to retch, but my throat was too clogged to spit anything out. We called the police and they investigated. Police couldn't find anything that would be evidence for murder. The only thing worth noting was the dog tag the old man held in his hand when his body was found. Strange enough, it wasn't his. It was an old, rusted dog tag with the name DNSMH. The other letters were no longer readable due to wear. The night the murder occurred, I quit working at the hospital. I didn't want to experience something as horrifying as that night for the rest of my life. I wanted to tell the police about what I saw with the statue, but I figured it was just hours of work finally taking its mental toll on me. The last memories I had of that place was when I went through the back parking lot and drove my car to the front entrance. One of the statues were missing.
This happened to me about a week ago. Honestly, it's one of the most freaky encounters of my entire life. It's 100% true. Last week, I took my dog to this fenced dog park. I tried to go for around 5 or 6 because that's when most people get off work and bring their dogs. So there's usually a large amount of dogs for my puppy to socialise and play with. It rained earlier in the day but then stopped, so I was surprised to see only one other person in the dog park. I knew both him and the dog and we chatted for a while our dogs chased each other around. Also worth mentioning is that the atmosphere was just so creepy. There was a low thick fog which covered the entire dog park. It was that horrible weather where it's both cold and humid somehow, so it was overall just dreary. It had been raining all day. It wasn't that dark yet, so when the guy left, I decided to play fetch with my dog for a little while. Mistake number 1. I threw the ball around for a bit and on one throw something caught my eye. There was a man, all in black, hooded up, standing at the fence, completely still, facing towards me. I couldn't see his face though, so I didn't know if he was looking directly at me. I tried to brush it off as maybe he's just watching us play fetch. I do have a 5-month-old puppy after all who is adorable and draws a lot of attention from strangers. I threw the ball in his direction a few times after that so I could glance up towards him and see if he'd move on. No, he never did. At that point, I started to get pretty freaked out. I didn't want to stay alone in the dog park with only one entrance. It was significantly darker at this point as well. I really wanted to get out there, but in order to leave, I'd have to walk straight past this man. The dog park only has one entrance on one side. You have to walk the length of the dog park onto this path in order to get out. Walking past him was the only way out, that meant. So I gathered my stuff and began to leave. I walked to the entrance and glanced at him every few seconds. He's still just standing there completely still. Now he's turned towards me. I took out my phone and pretended to be talking on the phone, saying something like, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. 15, what? Too soon. Okay, Dad, I'll try." The moment I left the park, he turned and started walking away towards a parking lot. I was really relieved, but only for a moment. He wasn't walking, he was shuffling, only a few feet at a time. Then he would completely stop and turn around and look at me. He repeated this about 3 or 4 times. Then his walking changed. He started throwing his head back, looking up at the sky repeatedly and rhythmically taking huge strides towards me. His movement was very bizarre. It was an exaggerated tiptoe walk. It was really creepy. He was moving slow, not fast. The moment he started doing it, the story was the first thing to pop up into my head of people being followed like this. Every 15 feet or 10 maybe, he would look back at me. It was creepy as fuck. I was walking behind him slowly in the direction of my car. Needless to say, I was pretty much 100% convinced that I was going to be raped, stabbed, robbed, kidnapped, whatever. I was scared to death. My whole body was tense and cold. I've never felt like that in my entire life. It's a deep, horrific feeling in the pit of your stomach. I could die tonight, I thought. Then suddenly, he turns sharp and runs into the trees alongside the path. I took this opportunity to pick up the pace and passed the spot where he'd ran into the trees. Mistake number 2. Barely seconds after I passed him, I hear a rustling and he's coming out of the trees behind me, fast. No longer walking like the smiling man, as fast as he could. It was a weird power walk straight towards me. This is where I noped the fuck out of there and started sprinting. My puppy was clueless to everything and was having a great fucking time. Oh boy, he's useless. I was only about 30 yards from my car. I scooped up my dog and jumped into the driver's seat, started my car, locked my doors and got the fuck out of there as fast as I could. As I was backing up out of my parking space, the lights shined for just a few seconds on the man who was standing at the end of the path / at the beginning of the parking lot, completely still, staring at me. I may or may not have called my mum and cried the entire way home. I did. I was so shaken up. I didn't want to walk around at night for a few days. Even writing this made me feel incredibly uncomfortable. Now I make sure that I am never the last person in the dog part. Creepy, imitating, smiling man, let's never meet. Ever. I wanted to say a massive thank you to my friend Deburke for having me on his channel and for sending me in the great story which he did. Make sure you go and subscribe to his channel. I'll leave a link on the video and in the description to do so. I strongly recommend you do, as he always has very interesting videos.